Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. We apologize for the delay. We're having a few technical difficulties. Welcome everyone to today's webinar speaker series, A Place for Knowledge Exchange. Thank you for joining us and sharing your time with us, and most probably your lunch time as well. So this speaker series is co-hosted by the College of Rural and Community Development and the International Arctic Research Center to showcase and share collaborative approaches to research, education, and real-life community-based practices in rural Alaska. The speaker series is monthly, and our next one is scheduled for March 21st and will be focused on fisheries. We are also doing quarterly face-to-face collaboration launches. And the first collaborative launch is taking place on the 29th of February at the BP Design Theater that is located in the engineering building here at UAF. And now I'd like to introduce the facilitators. So through this project, we have supporting facilitators who are connected with our featured speakers and are in the background working on the logistics. These facilitators include myself. I'm Josie Tam. I am Assistant Professor in the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development. Margaret Rudolph, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the International Arctic Research Center. Jessica Black, who is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Rural Development, for Rural Community and Native Education. And Santa Roach, who is the Assistant Professor in the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development. Next slide, please. In respect to the Indigenous peoples before us, and in now the physical space we share here at UAF, we would like to start this webinar with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that everywhere we live and work is native land. We recognize, appreciate, and honor the Indigenous peoples and their past, present, and future land stewardship. We are committed to building long-term reciprocal relationships with Indigenous organizations and knowledge holders to create relevant and actionable information in support of their sovereignty and self-determination. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Today's dynamic speakers are going to share with us on the topic of co-stewardship from concept to action. They are going to lead us in a panel discussion to delve into those issues. And we thank them in advance for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us today. So our speakers today are Carrie Stevens, who is Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Tribal Governance at CRCD here at UAF. We have Mary Hostetter, who is the Tribal Steward and Indigenous Guardian for the village of Góos'k, as well as a fellow in the Tamanta program here at UAF. And Ralph Wolfe, who is the Director of Indigenous Stewardship Programs, Blanket and Haida Native Lands and Resources Division. Before we start, please note that our webinar is recorded and will be available for viewing later on the website of the UAF, IARC, and CRCD Speakers series. During this webinar, you can utilize the Q&A And our facilitators would help answer, and speakers will help answer any questions that you have. So the first part of our webinar is going to be, dedicated to hearing from our speakers, and the second half will be to answer any questions that you have. So with that, I'll introduce our first speaker, who is Mary Hostetter. Welcome, Mary.
Guyana, Josie, for the introduction. Guyana UAF college, or Guyana for having us today. I wanted to actually put a bit of a 5-minute timer on just so that we're staying on schedule. Waka, my name is Mary Hostetter. I am of the Big Lake, or Nunvuchbuk, in Southwest Alaska. And I have recently had the privilege to move back home to my community, which is what you see here. So Igyagik is about 70 people big. It's located in Southwest Alaska, so right as soon as you kind of see the peninsula, we're up on Lake Iliamna. I was invited here today, as Ralph and Carrie are here as well, to talk about co-stewardship and what co-stewardship means to me and to my community. And so I was originally inspired, well, rather, let me go back a tiny bit. When I left home, mostly for good, outside of coming back home to visit when I was 19, I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to do with my quote adult life. I'm getting a little bit closer to that now. When I was in the lands of the Akwan and in Xingat territory, I was really inspired by their strong connection to culture, place, and people to move back to my community to help in whatever ways that I could to protect my homelands and the lands of my ancestors. So I started at that time to really dig into our Indigenous history, our accurate Indigenous histories that were shared of Alaska, but also of the greater United States, and recognized that very many of the values that I was experiencing and the mindsets I was interacting with didn't align with the values that I wanted to uphold in my life, of protecting our Mother Earth, of looking at our relatives as the relatives that they are instead of resources, and really living in relationship with Mother Earth and the place that my ancestors grew up, picked berries, went hunting for pretty rocks. And so as I've been coming around to this stewardship, and I purposely will drop that co because stewardship is taking care of our lands, our waters, the air, and our relatives. And to me, that means using the already existing Igyagik adaptation assessment, which was a community-driven assessment, really taking into consideration our priorities of what we cared for, what we were noticing in our hometowns. And we use that to really revolve around what we're looking at as stewardship. So, oh yeah, please, thank you. Sorry, I have just one more slide after this, but these are all photos. And so I'll speak mostly about this one right here. And all of the photos that I'm sharing are drone pictures. Drones are a really amazing, powerful tool to be able to share stories and to really create the narrative from our perspective. So this is a picture of Lake Iliamna of Nunvuchbuk, and you can kind of barely see, there's a little stream right there where in the middle of the photo, kind of where there's some beach spawning salmon. So salmon, the Sayak, the Utsulukbiak, the Gangrik, and the Duntuvak. So salmon, sockeye salmon, the salmonberry, which is also known as the cloudberry, the ptarmigan, and the moose are are our four species and relatives of concern that we're shaping what our stewardship looks like. So as we're considering what different acts we need to be able to ACTS acts we need to take in order to protect our relatives, we are upholding the idea that we are all dependent upon one another. The health of our relatives equals the health of ourselves. The health of our land equals the health of ourselves. And recognizing that that in these spaces, we want to uplift our really our proficiencies, so our abundance mindset. And we'll hear a little bit more about that from Ralph and Carrie about the abundance mindset, recognizing that there's space for all of us in this place to steward our relatives, to care for our values, our traditions for the 7 generations to come. And may you go to the next slide, please? May you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. This is a creek that we're very interested. Oh, one back. Is there a lag? Am I experiencing a lag?
I was
Yes.
gonna say yes, because I did swap one, and then so is this the correct one you'd like to see?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. I just want to touch a little bit on this. This is one of our local streams. It's called Kaskanak, and this is where our historical caribou herds have calved, and it's also where we traditional harvest. And kind of putting in a little bit of our activities of stewarding. Recently, the BLM D1 lands comment period has ended, and there is a big chunk of land in this space of Kaskanak that is at risk of being opened to development or other outside entities coming in, and really opening the door to them living in relationship with this place in ways that don't align with our values. So stewardship to us means protecting our home. And I'll let Ralph go next.
Thanks, Mary. I thought it'd be a good idea to throw a timer on too, because I can get rolling. So thanks. I'm sitting here in Southeast at a strategic planning for our division. And I'm sitting in a weird place. I'm at the Forest Service's Mendenhall Visitor Center. And I think that just like emphasizes on the work I'm doing right now. Part of the work in stewardship, as I walked around the building this morning, there's not a person in sight, not a picture of a person. And I think the emphasis that I like to really push right now is like, as a people, we've been forgotten in so many ways. We've been pushed out of so many things. And I think the work between agencies and people who've come to this place and try to tell us how to live our lives has really pushed us to a brink of, in a way of that scarcity mindset that Mary was talking about. Whereas a people, we come from abundance. We live in abundance. We live in abundance of culture, of resources, of connection, of love, and a deep-rooted home that all of us understand. There's home in the fish, there's home in the rocks, there's home in the trees, there's home on the water. That connection is all home to us. And I think part of the mission of stewardship for me is to make sure that that emphasis is not missed when we're talking about relationships, when we're talking about management, when we're talking about stewardship, when we're talking about harvesting. The work that I feel is really important for us right now is guiding this boat, right? I also think part of that connection is being out there. And I get in trouble when I say this, but I don't hike. When I'm out on the land, I have a mission. I am traveling for culture. I'm harvesting for food for my family or my relatives. I'm connecting in ways that, bring a sense of calm, a sense of peace to myself and my kids. And that's what I do this for, the generations. As we're going through our planning today, this week, the thing keeps coming up is, generations. And I think as a people and as a place, I think it's so cool that we talk about future generations in a way of trying to set them up to be successful or be more successful than we have been and not fight the same fights that our parents have been fighting. We're not winning all of those battles, but as we move through co-stewardship, I see hope, right? I see hope in the co-stewardship agreement that we have with the Forest Service right now to help run this Mendenhall Visitor Center, to put the people back in the place that were erased from this place. And I just can't help but think how cool it will be for my kids to come here and see pictures of kids like them and hear history that they've talked about, because right now it's absent. And that's from a place that's thousands of visitors come a year, hundreds of thousands of visitors. That's a form of erasure. That's a form of genocide. That's a form of us not standing up and taking back what's ours. So, you know, in the next couple of minutes after Carrie talks, I'll get more to the relationship aspect of land, culture, fish, resources. You know, I think as a people of this place, it's not just about getting food. And it's not about who has the biggest fish or rack or most. It's about who sustains enough, who shares enough, and who passes it on. I think I can do a better job for sure, but we're trying, and the kids see, and we offer them adventures like canoeing. I'm a captain of a canoe. I'm a fisherman. I've been fishing my whole life. I hunt. I like to weave cedar bark, which is something that connects me so deep to the place. That's specifically in Southeast Alaska. So before I get jumping down that rabbit hole, Carrie, my 5 minutes is up.
Finishish, Hawa, Koyana, Anabasi, Masicho. Susie, you can go to the next slide. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank the planning team and the facilitators for the invitation. And I really want to say it's an honor and a privilege to know Mary and Ralph, to work with them. They are incredible Indigenous stewards, tribal citizens, working for their people and their tribal governments. So I cannot say Ana Basi enough. They are both swamped. They stepped out of day-long meetings for us here today. And I just want to, share a little bit about defining the concept of co-stewardship and ensure that we are all on the same page, that co-stewardship is founded on and within tribal governance. Here you see the joint secretarial order, and it is fulfilling the trust responsibility to Indian tribes in the stewardship of federal lands and waters. And of course, here in Alaska, we are in a very unique situation with over half, more than half of our state federal public lands and very unique Alaska Native land claims. So just want to recognize that the foundations of the concepts of co-stewardship are in direct relationship with tribal governance, with self-governance and self-determination, which are established federal Indian policy. And that we see here the commitment of both the Department of Interior and the USDA to US policy to restore tribal homelands and to promote tribal stewardship and self-governance. So we often hear terms like Indigenous-led, or, you know, incorporation of things like TEK, and that this is really a governance, decision-making, movement and concept that we're furthering. You can go to the next slide, Susie. And that within that, what is the trust responsibility when we hear the trust responsibility between the federal government and federally recognized tribes and indigenous peoples of the United States? And it is the highest moral obligation to ensure the protection of tribal peoples, their lifeways, their lands, their rights, and that this is legally enforceable. And so, again, that these concepts are grounded in policy, they're grounded in governance, and that it is the responsibility of all of us to uplift and ensure that the trust responsibility is met and is enshrined in federal Indian law, that Ralph and Mary's tribal governance, the sovereignty of their people, was recognized within our Constitution at the foundation of this country, that Mary and Ralph's people, Alaska Native people, and all the brothers and sisters in the United States were self-governing, were sovereign. And it's through this governance system that they have always stewarded their lands and their peoples and their places since time immemorial. And so as we look at the concept of co-stewardship on the next slide, people get rather wrapped around the axle. What does this term mean? Please define it. I need specifics. And so I have here, as Mary and Ralph both eloquently said, what is the term stewardship by the dictionary? And as you see this, we see the indigenous way of life, indigenous way of being is stewardship of people in place for future generations. The definitions of co-stewardship from the Department of Interior are again a relationship between tribal governments and the federal government in managing, conserving, and preserving federal lands and waters. While you all heard my 5-minute timer go off, I'll just conclude to say that don't get lost in these definitions. I don't think it means those things to Mary or Ralph or their colleagues or their peers. It means being in relationship. It means stewarding. It means recognizing and uplifting tribal responsibility and ensuring that people in place are cared for. And I always have to thank Dr. Black for introducing me to the 4 R's. Many of you know I always am framing in that way. But when we get lost in the political definitions of a term, we get limited and we don't carry out the real work that Mary and Ralph are sharing with us today. So I hand it back to Mary Koyana.
Goiana, may you switch to the next slide? And I'm sorry if I am still lagging. Oh, the one, yeah, that one. Thank you. The Ihyagak stewardship. So Ihyagak is a Yukton word, and it means the water going down the throat of the river. We're right at the meeting there of the Big Lake and the Kwijak River. And I want to talk about a little bit what I'm doing in my spaces, in my worlds, and don't want that to be very specifically personal, but also the changes that we can make do start from our own person. I'm also a Damumta Fellow. I work for our village council as a tribal steward. That also means that we're interacting in a bunch of different circles, whether it's federal and state in the granting world, in the academic world, or in our Indigenous space world when we're actually actively working on our tribal stewardship. Not that we're not working on it in those other spaces. I'm trying to channel my inner Carrie because you're so calm and deliberate, and I love it. And I feel like I'm just trying to run a million miles an hour right now. What I do to bring our stewardship into these spaces, and I think about the words that I'm using. The words that we use are incredibly powerful. When we use words like management, land management, and resource management, we are actively dissecting ourselves from the relationship we have with land and our relatives. And when we think about, especially in this academic world and the world that the federal and state agencies often also live in, where we're actively trying to manage our resources, Mother Earth can't be managed. I don't know why we haven't seen that yet. We interact with this in the academic sense where we are uplifting maximum sustainable yields. We are not recognizing the Indigenous knowledges across the world who have been observing changes, who bring our concerns to the feds and are told that's anecdotal, that where's your hard data? Our hard data is in our observation. It's in our keen observations. And so in the academic sense, in the federal sense, I very much have experienced this in working in state management, both research and commercial, but also in the academic world. We are living in a world where management is upheld above everything else. And you can switch to the next slide. These are photos I want to share with you of my home. So they're compelling and charismatic. So the first picture was the braids. This next slide, because it does seem like I'm lagging still, I'm sorry, is of a community event where we're learning about Atsalufbiak, or the salmonberry, or also known as the cloudberry. In this Western world, we're uplifting management styles that are not sustainable. We're uplifting knowledges that don't recognize that Indigenous knowledge is real, is here. It doesn't recognize that those same Indigenous people live on these lands, interact with these lands, and it also uplifts managing a resource, in quotes, from a computer, from behind a desk. And I recognize that very many of us have these jobs where we are behind a computer, behind a desk. And when you're managing our relatives from Anchorage or Fairbanks or Seattle, that means that you're not actively living in relationship with that relative and recognizing when it might be doing really well or might be doing very poor. And so as we consider what a transition from this Western style management looks like to what it would look like to be more, or to align our land relationship and relative relationship planning around Indigenous values, Indigenous mindsets, and really the traditions that our people have. I really appreciated, Ralph, when you were saying that when you don't go hiking, right, you're on a mission. And I was thinking that when you are out collecting fish, my timer did just go off, but when you're out, you're connecting to home, you're connecting to your ancestors, you're connecting to the very lifeblood and not literal blood that connects us to place. And when we are looking and being groomed in, I'd say that the academic world, very much of the academic world, grooms us into this one type of management idealism and this one type of paradigm that isn't the only one that exists. And for the very many academics who are in this space who might feel uncomfortable from that, or the feds or state agencies who might feel uncomfortable with that transition, because we've heard some of this in these spaces that there isn't room for me. What will I do? And there is room for you. We are an abundance mindset. We are rich in these opportunities, rich in our wealth of knowledge of our home and our place, and know that this is what we need to do in order to protect the entire globe and the entire human race for us to be here. And so I'll hand it over to Ralph, who can speak more eloquently on connection to home and his idea of stewardship. Guyana.
I have a feeling Carrie picked us for certain reasons, Mary. Your talks about relationships to our relatives is really struck a chord, because I love how every time we talk or have gatherings with Carrie and the different groups that we're a parts of, it brings up something different. And I think that was a new one today. And I love the term, I don't like the term subsistence either. I specifically push, especially within my division, traditional harvesting and gathering also, but not to get too far off. I think a lot of the work I do is relationship based with organizations and government agencies. I was brought on as the Guardian program manager to start. However, through a couple of good hires and necessity, I've been promoted to director at Native Lands and Resources. And I think a lot of the work I get to do involves trying to figure out where we stand as a people. And I speak for myself, but I'm, as a representative for Tlingit and Haida. That picture's fine, Mary. That makes me feel like at home. And like what the different roles of everyone in the world that we're dealt right now, whether it's government agencies, state agencies, NGOs, conservation organizations, Indigenous-led organizations, educational folks and backgrounds. Apart from having I have an associate's degree. I'm very excited to start working with Carrie and Dr. Black on getting my bachelor's finished and hauled out. But I think the relationships that I'm working on is figuring out like where the tribes and agencies and education departments land on data, land on governance, land on the roles that everybody has within all of these discussions. Because as tribes now, I can see, and I speak specifically for the folks I work directly with, is I don't know how much more data we're going to be sharing with everybody without co-stewardship or co-management agreements. Because if that's the data that you want, we're the people you have to talk to and go through, because we're the folks that have been here for thousands of years, and we're going to continue to be here for thousands of years. And it's not a jab or anything, but it's also not a free thing that we're going to be doing. A lot of the work that we do is asked from state, federal agencies, academics to provide this time and data for free. And I think we're seeing that it's becoming such a huge role in the work that we do that we can't afford to do that anymore. It feels like all I do is have meetings talking about data sovereignty and data management and data collection, about interagency relationships. And I think how we enact that going forward is a hard discussion, but it's one that needs to happen. I think we have to be involved in planning. We have to be involved in financial obligations, because those obligations fall on us. a lot of the time. And I can only speak for Southeast, but I've heard over and over again, we are so over obligated on so many levels. It's very hard to keep up. And we can't say no because this is the work we have to do. There's something deep inside us that says we can't say no. We've been in strategic planning for 3 days. I'm exhausted, but I'm here because Carrie said she needed me here. And I wanted to be able to speak with you all and get these out because the work that we're doing is so important. The amount of energy it takes is so enormous. But I know that these harder conversations about roles and responsibilities, tribes aren't just going to be at the back anymore. And a lot of my work is having those conversations, specifically with like the Forest Service, because they manage the Tongass in our area. And I could just see so much disconnect. It's absolutely amazing. And the amount of relationships building that has to happen in order to get a small step is absolutely ridiculous in my mind. However, I see the benefit behind the process. And like I said, we're in it for the long run. This Forest Service manager may be here for 1 year or 10 years. We're still going to be here. And we're still going to have to work through these agreements and these issues. And I think that's a lot of the like enactment that we have here. And I thanks Carrie for throwing some of these things up on the slides because it helped me form my thoughts because I threw my notes out the door as soon as Mary started talking. But I think I covered what I wanted to. Thank you.
Again, Góos'k, Koyana, Hawa, Mary and Ralph, just really appreciative of you being here. I think that I see a question in the chat and it's in the Q&A section, Mary or Ralph, if you want to answer it, but hopefully some of these next slides as we wrap up and answer questions help to define the how. How do you plug into this work that Mary and Ralph are doing? How do you uplift and engage in co-stewardship? And I just want to give a shout out to Senator Murkowski today in her address to the state legislature, called out tribal self-governance, self-governance contracting and compacting in the work of food sovereignty and food security. And so again, each one of you in your role, be it as an academic, a teacher, a researcher, a doer, an administrator in a nonprofit, doing this work at the state and federal level is building relationships. One of my favorite quotes from Ralph is that we can only move at the speed of trust. You must build relationships and spend the time. That's our most valuable resource. And you must invest in the peoples, the communities, and the tribes with which you're working. The original stewards, the stewards of that place. They will always be there. They're not going anywhere. And so if you want to have the greatest impact in your work as a researcher, as an educator, as a manager, as Mary said, then you need to step back Let tribes lead, empower them to lead, defer to them, follow their protocols, help them develop their protocols, operate at their pace. And I do believe that you can write research awards that actually move at the pace of tribal governments and Indigenous communities if you take intention to do it with them at the outset. A lot of times, I hear many researchers and academics wanting Indigenous knowledge to be wrapped in a bow to fit into their model. You're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Stop trying. It exists of its own right. It is at a different pace and a different level of knowledge and stewardship. One of the biggest things for me will always be equity in resources and equity in funding for tribes. I always have a story that I was working for tribal governments for many years before coming here to UAF, and we received an award in the mail for an NSF project we didn't even know we were named on. Let alone did we receive equitable funding or resources for that work. And so if you are working with Indigenous peoples and tribal governments, you cannot expect them to show up. Like I did today of Ralph and Mary, thank you. Without adequately funding them. I hear, oh, the lights are on and no one's home. They're paid to do a job. And their job is not to meet your needs unless you're funding them to do so. We all know that in our work, yet somehow we expect different of the people at home and on their land. The next slide says a lot of the similar things, so I'm not going to read all through it, but there is a paper that Dr. Black and I were a part of, and it outlines some questions when you are doing research to ask yourself. Are you doing many of the things that I just shared from the last slide? So we can skip to the next slide in the sake of time and questions. They're very repetitive. But I want to really acknowledge again governance. And as Mary and Ralph have both shared, their tribal governance, their self-governance, their Indigenous governance is based on their values, their principles, their knowledge and ways of knowing and being. And so co-stewardship, co-management is not at the top of the list for tribes. Indigenous self-governance is where their values and their principles can be carried forth and are centered. And it is their decision-making systems, including their tribal courts, their tribal governments, lead in stewardship. And so really encouraging you to dig deep in that. And to wrap up and make a little bit of time for Q&A and any closing comments, the last slide here we have referenced is abundance. And this is a photo from our very recent Co-Stewardship Symposium, and Mary and Ralph were on the planning committee as well. One of the outcomes that we heard from the symposium was fear. What about my job? What about my mortgage? What about my career if suddenly the tribes are running the refuge? We must move to a place where there is space for everyone. This is a just economy. This is a sustainable economy. This is a stewarded economic future for everyone, be it in research, be it in doing the work on the ground, data collection, data sovereignty, food sovereignty. There is space for everyone at this table. And because of the unjust colonialism, and whitewashed history of Alaska, we all must purposefully push and make space to ensure that tribal governments and Indigenous peoples have a leadership and governing role at these tables. Many of our researchers here at UAF are funded and work directly with Department of Interior and Department of Commerce agencies, from NOAA to NIMS to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Push those funds to tribes. Let Mary define your research priorities. That is the work to be done, and I appreciate this opportunity. Again, Ana, Basit, Góos'k, Hawa, Koyana. I'm really grateful to be here with you. It is a time of abundance. Right now, one of our tribes, their dance group, is presenting to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Alaska Native Relations training. Mary is meeting in Anchorage. Our chiefs are speaking to the House of Commons in Canada to save their salmon relatives. It is abundance. The work is moving forward. And I just encourage you all to get on that train. Again, Anabasit Masit, and time for closing comments and questions.
Thank you, Mary, Ralph, and Carrie, for leading us in this panel discussion on the importance of moving the concept of co-stewardship into real action. We have one question in the chat. Would any of you like to address the question that we have? And please go ahead and answer your questions, our guests, if you have any.
Yeah, I can take a stab at answering that question. I want to make it clear and also reiterate what Ralph said and what Carrie was saying, that our relationships move at the speed of trust. And so one of the things that we also need to recognize is that tribes are not collecting data for a research student to come in, take, and not bring back. That's pretty extractive still. So really, even in the composition of the question, or if you have the data, we can use it for research purposes. That is okay. But what is the relationship that you're building with that tribe? What is it that you're going to bring back to the tribe to be able to help them, instead of it being something that you're using for yourself? So really recognizing that our communities are sharing with you in this generosity, and it's a relationship. So please don't be coming to our communities and our tribes and asking for data that you're going to use to get your degree and not use it to help our communities or to help our world, because we, as small communities, tribes, we are collecting that data on our relatives, and it's not to be used in an academic sense that hurts us anymore. And I really liked that Ralph was saying that we're going to start being, and I'm paraphrasing Ralph, we're going to start being picky about who we share that data with. That data is our data. And so if you wanted to answer that too, Ralph, please feel free.
No, I think that's a great answer. And like, reciprocity comes to mind when we start talking about this. You know, I think that's where it comes down to, because I think it's been far too long of just extractivism, whether it's resources or data or people or whatever, right? Like, this reciprocity has to be a concept that's felt more in every aspect of our world. And I guess, like, there's no specific research group that we have. It's us. It's the people on the ground doing the work, that live there, that breathe there, that know when the fish come, and that know what tides bring them in, and that know how or what effects when the hooligan come in or when the herring spawn. You know, it's those things. So I think depending on what you're trying to get at and achieve through research absolutely depends on now, I think, the way you frame the questions and what your plan is with that. I think going forward, that's going to change. Is what I'm seeing and hearing.
I think that to the specific research group, I think that doing a search of tribal communities who have expressed either concerns through adaptation assessments or other different public or publications rather, that's a great place to start. And that really really that relationship building is what we're really trying to uplift, is that it is a relationship. It is a two-way street. And just really respecting that tribes have knowledge, tribes have indigenous sciences. We are the original observers. And so, yeah, building that relationship is the most important of that space for anything that we're doing forward, whether or not it's a graduate project or not.
I was just going to add that one comment I would consider for, you know, the questions here in the Q&A as well, is to find and connect with mentors in the research world here at UAF, folks like Margaret Rudolph, Dr. Jessica Black, and other mentors like Josie that are doing this work in a good way and in partnership with tribes, and seek their mentorship. Sarah Trainer also is doing this work here at UAF to ensure that people are, you know, acknowledging and uplifting and centering tribal governance and indigenous knowledge systems. So for Suhail, that would be one of my recommendations, is really to seek out mentorships. We do have them in various fields at UAF who are really working to lead in a good way. And of course, our indigenous scholars that we have here facilitating this session as well. That would be, you know, for early career researchers, that would be one of my recommendations.
Thank you so much. No, a big thanks to our amazing panelists for sharing your time and your knowledge with us, and for this amazing work that you are doing. So if there are no further questions, I would like to close this webinar and also invite anyone who is here in Fairbanks to join us on the 29th for our first collaborative lunch at the BP Design Theater. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us.
Anabasi.